We're in Proverbs chapter 6. We're in a series on Proverbs talking about living life well. And one of the interesting things about Proverbs is that the opening, really 10 chapters, give a lot of the big ideas that will be addressed in the book, but they really are sort of an introduction section. And then once you get past Proverbs 10, you really get into those little nuggets of truth that we're encouraged to memorize and apply to our lives. Today in Proverbs 6, we're gonna start moving into that place of here's some little nuggets of truth for us to learn and to examine our lives to see if we are living life well according to God's design. And then, like I said, as we get further on into the book, we're just going to start focusing on some of those little nuggets that we can take. And I really want to encourage you, memorize Scripture. It's a huge gift if you have just one simple proverb in your mind. You'd be amazed how those things come up as you're walking through life. So Proverbs 6, we're going to look at verses 1 to 19 today. Let's jump right into it. It says, "My son, if you've put up security for your neighbor, if you've shaken hands and pledged for a stranger, you have been trapped by what you said, ensnared by the words of your mouth." I remember years ago, I was mentoring a young guy, actually Matt, who plays our cajon every once in a while on Sundays. And he was reading through the Bible and he got to this and he was like, "What does it mean to put up security?" And so I was like, well, if you build a fence for your neighbor, and we were like, I don't think that's what it means. When you dig into it, it means basically co-signing for a loan. What you'll find in Proverbs is that the information is extremely practical and it meets us where life is. And many of the challenges that we face in life are about communications and money. And so right here in chapter 6, the author Solomon is saying, "My son, if you have co-signed a loan for your neighbor, if you've shaken hands and pledged with a stranger, you have been trapped, you've been ensnared by the words of your mouth." That's a strong word. That's a strong thing to say to somebody. If you've co-signed on a loan, you are trapped. Think about the words trapped or ensnared. They're not kind of saying, oh, it's a little bit of a problem. It's like something has gotten a hold of you and it's hard to get out of it. And so let's ask the question, why would Solomon say, don't do that, or be very, very cautious about doing that? Here's the baseline, I would say. Money makes people do weird things. It just does, right? Do the research on whether it's professional athletes who make a ton of money and then end up spending it all and go bankrupt, or people who win the lottery and years later are often in a worse off position. So you would think people who have a lot of money would solve their problems, but they often don't because it's not a financial issue, it's a heart issue. And so there's a caution here to say, like, be careful who you link together with in life around the theme or the topic of money. So one thing we need to realize is that we should be cautious about how we link our lives to others with money, particularly on this issue of co-signing on a loan, which basically means if I come to a person and say, the bank won't give me a loan, but if you will sign, it'll give me the loan, meaning that if I don't pay it back, now you're going to be held responsible, okay? So in this context, here are a couple of the dangers that might come up. First of all, it is possible that a person who's asking this individual to co-sign on a loan is doing so because they already face financial struggles. They have shown that they haven't been able to handle money well. Now hear me now, that's not a judgment. Some people are better with money, some people are worse. But if you're not good with money, and then you get looped in to somebody who's not good with money, guess what camp you're in now? Danger. So we should just be cautious, the scripture is cautioning us. The other thing to remember is that whether it's back then or now, if I co-sign on a loan with somebody, what if my life changes? What if they're doing a great job, but all of a sudden now my job changes? I have to move. All of a sudden now I'm in a different financial position. It may put me in a bad place. It might also put this person in a bad place. And so the caution here is, at the core, be careful how you link yourself to other people with money. It's just dangerous. I was thinking about this for myself when Jenny and I first got married. It was the winter season was approaching, and sometimes before the darkest, coldest season here in New England, oil companies have a reduced price on their oil, and so you can buy a lot ahead of time. And we didn't have the resources to buy all our oil for the winter at that point, and so we reached out to my mom and said, hey, can you loan us some money so we can buy some oil, and then we'll just pay you back every month because we can get it cheaper now. We didn't have any issues at the end. We paid her back, and she got her money back. We got the oil. But the entire winter season felt awkward because it was like, okay, is she good? Are we good? Like, what if she needed that money all of a sudden and we didn't have it to pay it back for her? By the grace of God, it worked out okay. But I'm just thinking to myself, man, that was awkward, even though it worked out well. And so this proverb encourages us, be careful, don't ensnare yourself in co-signing on a loan with somebody else. And look at the response in verse 3. So do this, my son, to free yourself from what he's talked about, ensnared, being trapped. Free yourself, since you have fallen into your neighbor's hands. Go to the point of exhaustion and give your neighbor no rest. Allow no sleep to your eyes, no slumber to your eyelids. Free yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, like a bird from the snare of the fowler. Here's the other bummer, is that if you follow this advice and you've co-signed a loan, Solomon is saying now it's your job to put in the work to get out of it. And you're like, well, I was trying to help somebody. He's like, don't care. You put in the work. You're like, well, how much? He's like, I'm glad you asked. Go to the point of exhaustion. Don't give your neighbor rest or yourself rest. Get out of that situation. He's basically saying, whatever it takes, beg, plead, but get out of it. Be freed like this gazelle who was trapped and now has been released. Here's my recommendation to you. Okay, now let's be clear here. Like, thus saith the Lord, over here, thus saith Tim, okay? But I just give you my experience. I find when it comes to engaging with money with others, it's usually two camps for the Carpenter family. It's either, no, we're not going to do it, or let's just give it away and let them deal with it. Versus the middle ground of like, well, I'll loan you the money, hopefully we can get it back. Like, it just puts you in a hard position. Like, if I give this person money and they use it poorly, I'm like, I did my best to help this person, and now maybe I can't solve all their future problems, but I know probably not going to get more money from me because they didn't handle this well. But when you give that money, you're kind of like, God bless you. And if it doesn't go well, I'm not the one that has to feel the ramifications of it because I just gave it to you. Or on the other hand, just saying, I can't do that right now. So my encouragement to you would be pick one of the two camps and don't go into the middle camp, because that's where it seems to get more convoluted. Now, verse 6 to 11 is interesting because we've got this person who's asking for the co-signing or the loan. We've got the loaner, and then Solomon starts talking about working hard. So who is this for, the loaner or the loanee? He doesn't tell us. But there's a deeper theme here, which is to say when money's involved, one of the solutions that we see from Solomon is work hard. Now you might hear that and go like, that's pretty obvious. But even back in this time, it's obvious that people weren't always willing to put in the extreme effort to avoid a loan or to get themselves out of a tough place financially. Let's take a look here. It says, go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler. Yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a thief and scarcity like an armed man. I want to note something really important here. This is not just saying, hey, if you're not making a lot of money and it's hard for you to get by, that's your fault. The description here is of somebody who's not putting in the effort, and because they're not putting in the effort, when they clearly are able to, they're not getting the results. So if you hear this, you're kind of like, I'm doing my best. This is not for you. If you're putting the effort in, this is not what Solomon is critiquing here. He says, go to the ant, and then look at the next two words, you sluggard. I don't know if you've ever used that word in conversation before, but I'm aiming to use it way more. It's just not a word that we use to call somebody a sluggard. I'm not going to use that word, but like that's a very strong word. Go to the ant. Now think about this. It's Solomon giving wisdom to another human. So imagine me talking eye to eye with another human and saying, you should go to the ant, this tiny, tiny creature. And then it's described at the end of that section, it has no commander or overseer or ruler. There's nobody telling the ant what to do, and yet it is smart enough or has instincts enough to know, I got to work now and store up food for later. And so the challenge here is sometimes you have to just grind it out. Now, different people fall in different places about how they feel about Dave Ramsey and his whole ministry. But one thing Dave Ramsey says that lines up directly with this is sometimes you just got to put in extra effort to get to a better place. He's the kind of guy who's like, take a second job, take a third job so you can pay off that loan or that debt so you can get into a better place. And that's not Dave Ramsey advice, that's Solomon's advice. Sometimes you just have to grind it out to get to a better place. And the way he describes it there, he says, you're a sluggard in verse 6. Verse 9, again, you sluggard, how long will you lie there? When will you get up from your sleep? I love this. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. Just a little. Just take a little nap, just a little break here, just got to take a little break there. A little adds up to a lot pretty quickly. I jotted down here, and it like came out of me. I said, a few justs add up to a bust. Right? I'm just gonna. And then all of a sudden, you're in a really bad spot. And whenever I read this in my head, I hear it like this: a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. And poverty will come on you. Like it's a pivot right there. It's like you are going to suffer if all you do is come up with excuses about not putting in the effort. So this is a chance for us to critique our own lives and to say, okay, where do I see this in my life? And where that a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands is impacting my ability not to roll in the dough, but to provide for myself, for my family. And maybe you hear this, you're like, not my issue. Praise God. Maybe you hear this and there's somebody in your life that God's going to use you to lovingly speak into their life. Or maybe this is advice for you take now, and it's not applicable today, but 6 months, a year down the road, you could go, oh, now I'm remembering that proverb that's challenging me to put the effort in and to not to be the sluggard. Okay, so there's the challenge in the opening section. And then we have a pivot from talking about money and work into the type of person that we don't want to be. It's almost like Solomon is saying, don't be this way. And here's the extreme picture of what this might look like. Verse 12, he says, a troublemaker and a villain who goes about with a corrupt mouth, who winks maliciously with his eye, signals with his feet and motions with his fingers, who plots evil with deceit in his heart and always stirs up conflict. If you were to summarize those three, you might say evil words, evil heart promotes disunity. Evil words, evil heart promotes disunity. It starts off and says, a troublemaker and a villain goes about with a corrupt mouth. The words coming out of this person's mouth are corrupt. They're unhelpful. They can be lying or deceitful. I got to be honest with you, I love 13, who winks maliciously with his eye. Later on, sit face to face across with somebody and say, hey, let's have a competition to see who can wink more maliciously. I'm like by myself typing on the computer going like, clearly that's not what it's saying, but what it's saying is that I turn to Mike and we have a plot against Will, and I'm like, yeah, we'll meet you later, Will. And that means that it's bad news for him because we've got a plot going on against him, right? So he says, be careful with these words, the person with the corrupt mouth, a person who's plotting evil. It says, who plots evil and deceit in the heart, and the end result of that section is who always stirs up conflict. Contrast that with Jesus' teaching in the Sermon on the Mount, where he says, blessed are the peacemakers. So here's a critique for us to ask of ourselves. You may look at that and go like, I'm not a troublemaker and a villain. I don't have a corrupt mouth. But the end result of this broken heart is that you can be a conflict creator. So just check yourself. Are you someone who promotes peace or conflict? Are you a peacemaker or a disunity causer? We'll see in a future week when we talk about the topic of friendship that we also need to be cautious about when we link our lives to people who are in the second category. Be careful if you spend time around someone who's constantly stirring up controversy, because that will eventually leak over into your life and impact you negatively. Now, when I say, are you someone who's stirring up conflict? I know that there's somebody in this room who's going, sometimes you got to have hard conversations. But hard conversations and stirring up conflict are different. Hard conversations are rooted in, this is because I love you and I have to say some things that might hurt your feelings. Stirring up conflict are people who go behind one another's backs, gossip, speak poorly, or just talk about things that generally agitate the spirit. And so the caution here is don't be that kind of person. And look again at the result in verse 15 that Solomon gives to us. Therefore, which means in light of what I just said, disaster will overtake him in an instant. He will suddenly be destroyed without remedy. In light of this evil that's being carried out by this person, disaster is going to overtake him when? In an instant, and he will suddenly be destroyed. Now, this is one of those things when you read this and then you think about what you see in life, you might go, I see people who are constantly stirring up conflict, constantly causing problems, and they don't seem to be suffering for it. And I think that's true to a point, but when the suffering or the judgment comes, which it often does, it happens in a moment and life is different. Right? People who make certain decisions and they're doing a little bit of shadiness here with their business, a little bit of shadiness here, a little bit of shadiness here, and then when it's found out, usually the law enforcement offices don't show up and say, we'd just like to have a conversation and we'll drag this out for the next 6 months. They usually show up and they say, we've got evidence, and now in light of that, you have the right to remain silent. Right? In an instant, life is different. The caution, I think, for us here is to go, realize we don't want to be this kind of person, but also realize that if you think you're getting by and no one knows and it's going to end up well, be really careful, because in an instant, suddenly things are turned upside down. Things are pivoting in a moment when you're like, things were great, I was in no trouble, and now all of a sudden I'm in trouble. And it says he will be destroyed suddenly, and then it says without remedy. There are certain thresholds we cross that when it comes to the day-to-day implications, there's no way of coming back from it. You can make certain decisions that will haunt you for the rest of your life. Forgivable? Absolutely, by the grace of God. But it doesn't mean that we don't walk on this earth with the reality of the brokenness that we've invited into our lives. So let's be cautious. Let us not think again that we're the exception to the rule. This could never happen to me. Just like it's a little bit of sleep and a little bit of slumber and a little bit of folding of the hands, it can be a little bit of this and a little bit of that, inclining us toward evil, and then all of a sudden, life gets turned upside down and disaster falls upon us. Let's look at this last section. 16 to 19 says, there are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a person who stirs up conflict in the community. Notice here that there's an echo of what we see in verse 14, which is conflict getting stirred up. I wonder if that's on Solomon's mind or heart as he's writing this particular proverb, that he's agitated about something going on because he's seen it. Now, this phrase, there are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 things that are detestable to him, it's a sort of a way that people would write in a poetic fashion, right? If I was going to say to you, hey, let's talk about 2 things when you come over. No, 3. You wouldn't go, he doesn't know what we're talking about. You go, he's just kind of processing, and as he's processing, he's sharing. So this is a way that Solomon says there are some things I want to talk about. Not just 6, there's 7 things I really want to hit on that God finds detestable. I want you to think about, just like we don't use the word sluggard often, we don't use the word detestable that often either. It's a really strong word. It's one thing to be like, I really don't like that flavor of ice cream. But if I said to you, that flavor of ice cream is detestable, you'd be like, you have very strong feelings about ice cream. We don't use it about generic things, right? It's more intense things. And so he says, these are 6 things that the Lord hates, almost like he's saying, nay, these are 7 things that are detestable to him. And then he gives us this description. And most scholars say that the first 6 are all symptoms that land on the last one, which is someone who stirs up conflict in the community. Okay, so what type of people do that? He says someone with haughty eyes, which means to look at others with pride and superiority. I'm looking down on people all the time. And it says God hates that. Well, why does he hate that? Fundamentally, it's because we're putting ourselves in the place of God. God has full authority and right because he does look down on everybody, because he is the great one who is perfect, almighty. And when I step into the place of looking down on someone, I'm equating myself too much to who God is. It's also, in light of the cross, it's saying, well, I'm actually a better person than you, which when we compare ourselves to the perfection of God, we're all like way down here on the scale. I laugh sometimes when I think about this idea. People say, well, when you get to heaven, God's going to make you perfect, right? And there are some folks who are like, well, I'm like most of the way there, and so he's got to clean up the edges when I get to heaven. And I'm usually like, oh, child. And I feel like as we get older, we understand more and more how broken we are. And like when God perfects me in heaven, I'm going to be like, wow, this is a lot different than I was. Doesn't mean don't work on our sanctification here on earth, but God, in his perfection and who we are, there's such a gap that when I look down on people, I'm taking on a role like God, and that is idolatry. It's self-idolatry. God despises that. Let us not do that way. It's living in a way that's not truthful or loving because I'm viewing myself as better when I shouldn't. And God wants us to live according to reality. Number 2, it says a lying tongue. Lying just straight up is not speaking the truth. And it's often done for personal gain, right? Most people don't lie just for fun. They lie because they want to avoid pain or they want to gain pleasure. There's another self-idolatry there, which is that I need to provide for myself. And if I don't tell the truth here, it'll benefit me, and that's better than trusting God. And so God says, you're living as your own God. You think you know better than I do. Don't have a lying tongue. Speak the truth. When you speak lies, you're living in a way that does not line up with what reality is, and God does not like that. Again, in the New Testament, Jesus says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. That's like Christians should have the inclination to eliminate the phrase, I promise, from their vocabulary. Because you shouldn't have to promise. You just say, if I say yes, it's yes. If I say no, it's no. I promise is like, I really, really mean it, because sometimes I lie. No, we should just say yes, and it's true, and no, if it's not true. So God despises a lying tongue. 3rd, hands that shed innocent blood. This is most likely to mean literally murder, not just injuring somebody so they end up bleeding. Hands that shed innocent blood, the death of another image bearer. Genesis 1:26 says humans are made in the image of God, and to shed innocent blood is to take the life of someone who was made and created in the image of God to bring his image to this planet. And when I shed innocent blood, I'm destroying the image bearer. God despises this. He doesn't want us to live this type of way. Here's the last few. He says, a heart that devises wicked schemes. It's one thing to shed innocent blood. Dare I say, it's even worse to plan to shed innocent blood. In our judicial system, we even have that. 1st degree and 3rd degree murder are 2 different things. We talk about premeditated. That's what this is, a heart that devises wicked schemes. Like, okay, now I've learned to never do this, right? And thanks be to God, I have a wonderful mother-in-law, so I don't even need to do it. But if I walked into our house someday and walked up the steps and said to Jenny, you are just like your mother. Now, to her, she might be like, oh, thanks, because her mom's great. But to say I didn't get along with her mother, my mother-in-law, right? And I walked in the house and we got into a fight, and all of a sudden I'm just like, you're just like your mother. That's one thing to just spout it out. It is a totally different thing to, on the drive home, to go, I know what I'm going to say. To get out of the car, to walk in the door, and this voice in my head is going, don't do it, bro. That's a dumb choice. And I'm like, shh. And I walk up the steps, and then I say that to her. That is premeditated. That is a heart that devises wicked schemes. And God says, I do not like that. I hate that. That is despised. So let us be people who don't live this way. Number 5, feet that are quick to rush into evil. It's ironic because number 4 is like scheming and planning. Number 5 is like, I just did it. And it's almost him saying, I don't like this, but also I don't like this. You fly off the handle, bad. You plot evil, also bad. God is creating this list that as you look at it, to some degree, we're going to go like, oh man, I'm finding myself somewhere on that list, maybe multiple times. The next one, a false witness who pours out lies. Similar to number 1, which is lying, but a false witness has the intention of hurting someone else. Someone asks me something about this person, and I bear false witness. I say something that's not true. Yes, probably to benefit me, but also to hurt this person. Again, God says he despises that. And lastly, all these things tie together to someone who stirs up conflict. I want you to see here, as we've said many times during the weeks in Proverbs, that sin leaks. It's never just you. And you might commit all these types of evil behaviors out there and not with people close to you, but eventually it trickles into your heart and your soul and it leaks out into somebody that you care about. That's the nature of what sin does. Do you want to be seen as a divisive troublemaker? Like, I don't know anybody who's like, I'm signing up for that. But on the other side, if we're honest with ourselves, we can be that way sometimes. And in the scope of Proverbs, we see that there are links, there are correlations, even if not direct causations, but there are links between these 6 things that he's listed and somebody who's divisive. And it takes courage for us to look at our own lives and go, there are hints of that in me. There are hints of that in my life, and I need to get it out. Proverbs is a book that calls us to live in a certain way in order to live life well. And we can do up to a certain point by sheer force of will, say, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to do this instead. But do you see why the center point of the entire story of Scripture is Jesus? Because when you read through that list, eventually you go, man, I don't think I can do that on my own. And the Spirit of God whispers, you can if I give you a new heart. You can if I replace your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. Then you can live life well because you are now empowered by the very Spirit of God who will illuminate the truth of God so that you will love the things of God and hate the things of darkness. I find it so intriguing that central in this section is unity within the community. Let us never think that we live our lives just as individuals, but our lives will impact others. And in our day and age, if a church is healthy, honoring to one another, and living peaceably with one another, it is a witness to our world, which is constantly fighting with one another. That is part of God's purpose and plan, to take people from all different experiences and backgrounds and ethnicities and races and to bring them together and to go, the thing that unites them is so much greater than the things that might divide them. And it's a love of God and what Jesus has done for us that transforms us so we can be that kind of community by the grace of God. You don't have to just live life well by your own strength. He will give you the ability to do it through Christ. And for that, we should praise him.